Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm Tshepo Modiba, and thanks for joining me. Tonight, our resident expert, Mr. Africa, Langa Madonko, joins us again, investment principal at Africa Strategic Impact Fund, for a closer look at the market in Algeria. Yes. Algeria, not a market that we've touched on in the show as yet, so quite exciting to get your thoughts on it. How are you doing, Langa? Are you good?
No, I'm good. Happy New Year at last. Yeah.
In February, but you know, let's not worry about that.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about let's start with the big picture, the macroeconomics in Algeria. What's really driving this economy?
Okay, so Algeria is a slightly complex but easy to explain type economy. One that was very reliant on oil and gas, which accounted for 98% of its exports and about 28% of its GDP.
Right.
So last year when we went through that torrid time, they took a bit of a knock. They had a slight slowing in GDP growth because of the impact of lowering oil prices, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But they still managed to record decent economic growth overall. I think they did about 3 to 4%, and their GDP growth mirrors that also at about 4%.
Is that partially a currency offsetting the lower oil price?
Yeah, I think the exchange rate of the currency to the US dollar is one of the things that allowed them to offset some of the impact.
Right.
But also the fact that the economy over recent years has started to more or less diversify. So some of the other sectors like agriculture, which is one of the bigger employers in the country, managed to experience some growth and some good, decent returns in terms of the companies that are in that space. So that led to them being able to balance it out.
Yeah. And in terms of demographics, is this another very young economy?
The Africa story still plays itself out there. Young economy, lots of people looking for jobs, but it's one of the better African economies with an unemployment rate of just around 9.8 to 10%.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So actually decent economic growth, young economy. So I'm starting to like the sounds of this. This is sounding like an area where we should be quite bullish on.
Yeah, it's one. I think Algeria is probably my favorite North African country.
Oh, really? That's a big statement.
Yeah, you know, I mean, all the fundamentals in terms of what they're doing around where they need to go are correct.
Right.
Which, for example, is the reason why they have a Bursa, despite the fact that it only has 4 shares. I think it's basically there to create the message around wanting greater transparency in how businesses operate. It's also there for trying to bring around and about a situation where the companies have a more stricter code of conduct, ethics, and there's more public view in terms of what's happening in business.
Before we delve into the meat of the show, which is the stocks, what does policy look like from a government perspective? Is it very encouraging for business?
The government tries to make it as attractive as possible to be invested in the country. I think, however, some of the events of last year around the oil price may have forced their hands in terms of some legislation that they had to bring in to try and bolster the economy. But generally, it's a very open market that allows participation from international entities at every level, despite the fact that they are in a region that is generally francophone. They also speak English very well to try and give them greater access to the whole globe in terms of communication.
Let's jump in. This is one of the rare occasions where we can almost speak about the whole market. Right?
Yeah.
So 4 stocks, any particular place where you want to start?
Okay, I think by way of explaining the stock market, it's not there, like I said before, with the aim of chasing liquidity or capital raising. It's more one of introducing more regulatory reforms in terms of how companies report.
Right.
So all the companies that have listed there are the ones that are trying to come to market and get a greater reputation, as it were.
So free float's still quite small?
Yeah, free float. Most of the companies that have listed, they come in with about 25%, 20% in terms of the float. And what happens is there's usually an oversubscription in terms of the IPO. And after that, most of the guys who get the stock don't want to let go.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So liquidity is almost non-existent.
It's almost non-existent. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to start anywhere from a stock perspective?
Okay, I think the fair one would be to start with the first guys on the exchange, which were Seidal, the government pharmaceutical business.
Right.
The biggest in the country. The government owns about 80%, and then 20% is available through the market, which again was taken up very quickly when they first came on board. They manufacture about 215 different types of drugs, and then on top of that they have some generics that they are remanufacturing on behalf of other entities.
So just to understand, this is their own proprietary drugs that they have, or are they distributing?
They manufacture, and then they also have a distribution network for some other brands.
Right.
That they're bringing into the market.
Okay, so R&D is a big deal in a business like this.
It's a very big deal for them, and it's one of the directions that they've started to take is the move towards homogenic drugs, where they're now trying to see how traditional therapy plays in with regards to the science behind the pharmaceutical space and so forth and so on.
Okay. Now, given the demographics, is this a business that actually does well from a growth perspective?
Because the population is growing, and
Right.
of course with the more health awareness globally,
Right.
it's a business that continues to grow. All the fundamentals are there in terms of they've got an excellent distribution network. They've almost got a monopoly, as it were, being the largest company there. So they continue to grow, and they continue to be very adventurous in terms of what they're trying to do in the pharmaceutical space.
And any scope for expansion outside the country?
I think the integration of the Maghreb region gives you great scope for expansion.
Right.
And that's one of the avenues that I think they've been taking a look at in terms of how to get outside of Algeria into the other economies. There's also a great potential for them going further downwards into West Africa as well.
Yeah. And from a margin perspective, are they particularly profitable? You spoke a little bit about the generics business. How does that affect the overall balance from a margin perspective?
In terms of course, because of the generics, there's a slighter compression in the margins, but because the majority of the drugs that they produce are their own proprietary, and because of their market position, they've got relatively decent margins. Again, with them, they took a slight knock when there were certain issues during the Arab Spring, where part of their export business was affected a bit. But after that, they've come back, they're robust, and they're continuing to grow at a decent rate. That's slightly faster than the country's GDP growth.
So I guess the key question is, if you can get a hold of the stock, is this one that you'd like to acquire?
I think it's one that you would acquire, and again, it's a long-term play. It's one of the companies that will continue to perform well over the long term.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move elsewhere into the economy. Insurance, perhaps?
Yeah. Okay. So Alliance Insurance. Alliance Assurance is a brokerage business for insurance. They are in everything. They are in personal insurance, they're in car insurance, they're in commercial insurance,
Right.
and they are the biggest insurance business. And again, it's another one where they listed more along the lines of wanting to bring more regulatory reform and more accountability and transparency into the business. Very liquid, cash generative business. Probably, in my perspective, the best performer out of the four in the exchange.
And do they do their own underwriting, or it's purely brokerage?
It's the business is morphing and moving in a direction where now they're doing more of their own underwriting.
Right.
Previously, it was solely brokerage, and well, again, they had exclusivity more or less in terms of the business that they were getting from government, for example, which was a big mainstay. But now, with the growth of the economy, more businesses coming in from the rest of the world and finding a home in Algeria, their commercial business unit is the one that's leading and driving the growth in terms of the business.
And I guess the nuts and bolts of insurance, the capital base, is it a solid balance sheet? Yeah,
it's very solid balance sheet, and I think Algeria is a country that performs exceptionally well and is not much spoken about in terms of how insurance is playing out in Africa. While you are hearing numbers of 0.4% penetration in Nigeria, Algeria is a fairly mature market where the insurance penetration, particularly say in commercial insurance as well as in home and car insurance, is relatively robust in terms of the penetration.
Right.
Something that I think, in my view, given another 5 to 8 years, they could reach levels almost similar to where Kenya is right now.
So what does that mean from a growth perspective? It's a double-edged sword always, right? Potential growth anyway.
Yeah, there's still scope for potential growth because I think one of the things that they've done well is to diversify the portfolio of their offering. And so while commercial may be more mature in terms of personal insurance, home, car, and so forth, there's still a lot of scope. And as their agricultural sector continues to grow, they are also trying to move into that space. So there's room for them there. And then there's further diversification in the economy. So they continue to follow the trends.
I'm getting a very strong sense of your financial services bias here. I'm assuming this is one that you like.
It is one that I like. I mean, the fundamentals are right, and also they benefited a lot in terms of capital injection when they listed. I mean, they were oversubscribed. I think the subscription rate there was at like 160%.
Okay, let's touch quickly on one more company in the bourse. Your view, which one would you like to talk about? Okay,
I think NCA Ruben is another good company. It's an agro based business. They manufacture juices, and I like it because it's a growing business, managed to get nationwide penetration, has also started growing into the Maghreb, but beyond that they've found a way and they're distributing their products in Europe, particularly doing Belgium, Spain, and they're also in North America with a good penetration in Canada. They're continuing to grow the range of products that they offer. Again, also one of those that when it went to market, everybody was excited about it and attracted a lot of interest.
You sound quite excited about it.
It is quite an exciting business because of the Maghreb opportunity that it has. Most of the other nations not doing so well in terms of the agri space, and it's one of the exceptional agro-based businesses in the area.
Okay. So all three stocks that we've spoken about, you seem to like all three. This is strange.
I think, strangely enough, I would go as far as to say, with a greater increased amount of liquidity, I like all four.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Let's leave it there. Very bullish on Algeria, thanks to my guest, Langa Madonko, aka Mr. Africa, investment principal at Africa Strategic Impact Fund. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter. That's @_Tshepo. Langa, you're
at Langa Donks.
There we go. Please send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag Buy Africa. From myself and the team, goodbye.